We are very fortunate tonight to have such an extraordinary panel. Geoff, could we start with you?
So I'm Goeff Webb. I'm a professor at Monash University, where I'm director of the Centre for Data Science. I've been working in artificial intelligence, in particular machine learning, for over 30 years. That's starting at Deakin, it might be said. And my work is primarily about how to make sense of data. So, for example, I'm working with data generated by the European Space Agency, where they're generating vast quantities of data. So every 10 metres square of the Earth's surface is imaged every 5 days, and we're working with them for techniques to be able to work out how every 10 square metres of the Earth's surface is being used. So a large analytics task.
Fantastic, thank you. Svetha.
Hi, I'm Svetha. I'm the co-director of what's called A²I², which stands for Applied AI Institute at Deakin with Con Muzakas. And basically I've also, like Geoff, been working on pattern recognition and machine learning in general. And more recently, I'm interested in what you can do when you have lean data, when you don't have enough data. How can you engage in an experiment in an interactive way to try and accelerate the optimization process of trying to get to a particular target goal, whatever that goal might be. But I'm really interested in SPARK because I think about 2.5 years ago I had this kind of crazy idea that we could do SPARK, and Daisy runs it much better than I could have ever done, because as I was saying, the food that I provided was just Mars bars, and so it's come a long way from then. So I'm very happy to be at a SPARK event. Yep.
My name is Raj, Vasa. I'm also a professor at Deakin, part of Distill, which now joins A²I². My original AI work, I think some of you may have heard the marketing version of it, it's called IBM Watson. That was 1995, built right here in Melbourne. The very early parts of the natural language processing engine that is now known as Watson. Philosophically, what I would now consider a horrible way of building AI systems is still the same, because I didn't know what I was doing back then. Literally, they had no clue. But I brute forced something and it kind of worked. And then more recently I'm now looking at the human factors of AI, which is should the AI even be part of a workflow? So when doctors are coming to us and saying, I need AI to help us with diagnostics, we're looking at should we even introduce it? And if so, how should we do it? That aspect of it, rather than the more fundamental technical aspects of it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm KEATON from Black AI. We're an Australian startup working in artificial intelligence and sort of robotics, based here in Melbourne. Some of the things we've done is help Volkswagen and Audi with the computer vision for their self-driving cars over in Germany last year. And we're sort of, I guess, looking to enable robotic automation in complex environments, generally speaking. So, city streets, supermarkets, construction sites. And the way we try and help that happen is just by improving the process that computers can map out and model the state of that environment at any given point in time. One of the things we're currently working on is semantic segmentation of 3D vision data. So just splitting up what comes out of a 3D camera to figure out which objects are inside that space, where they are right now. Cheers.
What I might do is start with you, Geoff, if that's okay, on the topic of time in AI. So it's crucial to realise that the rate of progress is irrelevant. Year after year we will continue to improve our technology. So the train is out of the station and there's no brake to pull. Would you agree?
I think it's pretty obvious that the rate of change is just going to keep accelerating. So, yes. When
AI researchers often talk about time, they will say things like, not to worry, we've still got a bit of time. Some researchers have said, it's 50 to 100 years away. Actually, one Google researcher, and I quote, "Worrying about AI safety is like worrying about the overpopulation on Mars." So referencing the time horizon, when do you think AI radically will change the way we do things? And how long do you think it will take for us to create those conditions safely?
I think you have to start by clarifying what you mean when you talk about AI. So if you really mean intelligent systems, I think it's going to be a very long time, because I think what AI has told us is more about what intelligence isn't than what it actually is. So we've learned that it's not about being able to play chess, for example, because the way the chess machines play chess, which is far superior to how any human can play it, has got nothing to do with intelligence. It's just brute force. And so it goes on with all of the things labelled artificial intelligence. And the great rise of artificial intelligence currently is more about marketing a set of technologies than actually about developing things that are truly intelligent.
Could you hold the mic, please?
It's hard to aim the mic appropriately. It's very directional. Now I've forgotten what the original question was.
It was about, when do you think the radical change? Well, what the public will perceive as
So
radical
the
change.
technologies which are being called artificial intelligence currently are radically changing things, perhaps much more than people realise already. So cat's already out of the bag on that
The
one.
time is now, yet
Yes.
you think that the real leaps and bounds will be the furthest away.
Well, I think it's going to be a long time before we actually have intelligent computational systems which are truly intelligent, but we've got extraordinary technologies which are called artificial intelligence, which are just changing the world under our feet.
That we live in. KEATON, would you like to comment on the time horizon? What's your predictions?
I think that, as you were saying, there's a very big difference between general intelligence and, something that can do a menial sort of task, repetitive task, as well as a human, if not better. Whether that be, sorting things on an assembly line or whatnot. I think, as you say, there's going to be those sort of job replacement, and the world, economies are going to massively change over the next, let's just say 5 to 15 years. And it's really hard to start to predict, the general intelligence side of things, I could say 80 years, 60 years, but at the same time, if somebody asked me if self-driving cars are going to be on streets actually driving 6-7 years ago, I would have said, today, then I'd say you're crazy. And it's really hard to sort of predict that, just because the rate of change is, increasing so much.
So it's definitely specific to different types of technology. So now every car developer is intended to test an automatic car by 2020.
Yeah.
So their rate of change is differing to other types of artificial intelligence. Great. Svetha, the topic of problem solving. So we have problems that we desperately need to solve. We want to cure diseases like Alzheimer's and cancer. We want to understand economic systems. We want to improve our climate science. What are the most exciting or promising uses of AI and machine learning that you have encountered to date?
So just as the panel said, I don't think we have any great, what I would call AI applications yet. We have good applications of good machine learning, good pattern recognition, that's what we have. So as an example of what, as an example of why we haven't got there, I just want to say that one of the things I was even talking to my lab is there's all these machine learning methods that can do a lot of text processing, right? And we claim we've solved the translation problem. But if you gave a machine something as simple as the Aesop fables, they would have no clue how to understand anything. I mean, last of all, the moral, right? So if we want to get to machines that can do things for us and be useful for us, we have to make them, general intelligence is about, how can it absorb the social kind of norms of that place? How can it understand the things that are important to us? How can it have the same values as us? So those kind of applications I haven't seen, right? So I think that's still to come, and but there's a lot of work that we have to do before we can embark on building those systems, because we don't have the science to do that yet. What we have the science for is if there's a lot of data, we can do stuff. Actually, we can't even do stuff when there's very little data, right? So there's, and you're not going to have lots of data for everything. I mean, how much input do you need to give? And we know about the paradigm by which you teach children is by reinforcement, right? They make a mistake, they learn, they try, they make a mistake. The problem we have to make machines do that is, other than games, we don't know where else we could do this. So we've conquered games, right? But we don't know where else we can do this. Where else can we put a machine that can keep trying and failing and get the reinforcement? The reinforcement to a child comes from the world, right? The world gives it the reinforcement. We don't know how to structure that yet. Till we conquer this, even the next level, I think, is still hard for us to do.
Absolutely. Raj, would you like to comment on some of the exciting or promising problem-solving techniques we're seeing in technology?
Techniques-wise, there's many that are coming up, but the general theme I take from all this is that as a technology, it'll be IA, which is human intelligence augmentation. As tools like calculators, they'll be very, very useful. They'll have specific points where they're very, very effective. But broadly, like almost everyone else has said, they don't have context. Most of these machines don't operate with any contextual understanding, and they don't have embodiment. So work like SLAM and all these things, where if you build enough robots and they can absorb data, they build context, they don't even form memory well. We don't even know how to represent memory in any systematic way. And all the new techniques are great, but we don't have any fundamental theoretical understanding of some of how the higher dimensional mathematical principles are working out, what they're working out. They seem to work. It's mostly tinkered engineering, really. Not fundamentally, we know exactly what's going on here. And if you look at optics and things like that, from the Galileo trying to make a telescope to the point where we could build the Hubble, it's about a few hundred years. So I'm more on that, leaning towards that, think 50 to 100 years before you'll systematically start making sustained progress in this field.
So my predictions around the time were right, 50 to 100 years. Great. So Raj, I might stay with you on the topic of the future of work. I think the topic itself is dominated by fear and anxiety around that technology are going to take all of our jobs. And the fear tends to overwhelm another discussion, and crucial discussion, which I believe, that is this exponential technology could potentially be the catalyst to restoring our humanity. And that's an incredible opportunity. So when discussing the likes of machine learning and high tech and AI with people who may not be entirely in the space and don't have that understanding, which is obviously where the fear and anxiety is driven from, how do you navigate the conversations around the fears versus the opportunities?
Technology in general is hard. It takes a long time to build good technology and integrate it. Best case scenario, I'm going to bet that humans are not completely stupid and idiotic. So even though our politicians look clueless at times, best case scenario, we'll all have 3-day weekends if the machines do rise up and start to do many interesting things for us.
I think I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think most people would be okay with that. We're not going to mass lose jobs and everyone's going to be unemployed. I'm not that kind of person. I don't think that'll happen.
Are you experiencing that kind of fear and anxiety when talking about these kind of topics?
People that probably watch too many Hollywood movies, maybe,
Right.
believe those things, but no, I don't think. No mature CEO, CIO that I talked to in the last few years has that
Mentality.
I don't think that. They've seen enough technology rollouts to realize that they're hard, and we tend to have this magical ability to stuff up simple things. right? So this is not going to be something that will be doing anything at scale.
Correct.
So absolutely certain of that. We can't roll out accounting systems in a predictable time frame.
Yeah, true.
So AI is not going to be a threat.
Jeff, what are your thoughts on that, and how do you navigate those discussions between the fears and the opportunities of technology?
So I'm not so concerned about the probability of mass unemployment because the history for several hundred years now of the Industrial Revolution, where tasks have been continually replaced by machinery, has been new jobs have always been created. In fact, I bet if you looked in this room, very few people would have jobs here which existed over 100 years ago.
Yep.
So as things get automated, people are very good at inventing new jobs. And also, we are incredibly social animals. And we much prefer interacting with other people. If you spend as much time as I do in the Qantas Club, I find it really interesting to observe that there are automatic coffee machines there, which to my mind make a very good cappuccino. But in the mornings they have baristas, and there's a great big long queue of people waiting for a barista to make them a cappuccino. Whereas you can just walk up to the machine and get one straight away. People much prefer that human element. So I'm quite confident that there'll be plenty of jobs, probably very different jobs. My concern is that the jobs are going to be, so the middle level of jobs are going to be replaced by automation. So the very top level, highly skilled jobs are going to remain occupied by people. Then the repetitive, predictable jobs, like many aspects even of things like law and certainly accounting and maybe even computer science, are going to be replaced by automation, and people are going to end up doing more service-oriented jobs. And my concern is about how fulfilling people are going to find the jobs, the employment that they end up in.
That's available. Do you agree with the notion of moving the evolution of jobs and work through the problems that we're going to be faced in the future?
Yes, so I think there's going to be a huge change in the jobs. But as I said, my concern is that there's going to be that the middle range of reasonably interesting jobs are going to vanish, and people are going to be left either the lucky few in the jobs which can't be automated at the very top, and the many who are left in much less interesting, well, some people less interesting service type jobs where it's more human facing.
Nice. Great. Svetha, I'd like to quiz you on the topic of risks and ethics when it comes to AI. Like we could see from some of the topics that people were pointing on, ethics is obviously one that comes along with human and robots, and it's something that is highly discussed in the industry. I received a quote by Eliza Yudowski that says, "By far the greatest danger of artificial intelligence is that people conclude too early that they understand it." What are the challenges that you believe we face as a society as AI becomes more sophisticated? What risks and ethical considerations are there?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and that's a nice segue that Jeff and I are starting this program called Conversations about, I don't know what we're calling it. What are we calling it?
Conversations about AI, I think.
Conversations about AI, but it's really about exactly the kind of question that you asked, because it's a very broad conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I'll just touch on a couple of aspects of this. First, from the community of us researchers who are making these algorithms, right? It's a little bit alarming to me, as Ali Rahmani, one of our researchers, said, that we haven't constructed a black box algorithm, we've constructed a black box field. That is not good, right? We have to be able to, as Raj says, give guarantees that we're sure this algorithm is trained properly. We have to be sure when it's not going to work. We are sure with many other classes of algorithms. That's why you have a field called computer science. It's not just a bunch of stuff, right? So at least the field that's creating it has to be absolutely sure and give these guarantees and know what's going to happen, where is it going to fail. These are trained on data, right? So suppose the data is biased, the algorithm is biased. We have to be able to expose the biases. These have to be regulations that we have to bring in, because you may have an algorithm that's biased towards gender, towards race, towards anything, just based on the data it's trained on. So from the field, I think it is time for us to pause, ask these difficult questions, and basically just grow up, right? We've got to stop hacking and actually do some hard math. This is all hard maths. We've got to do it so that we figure out how these complex things are working. It's not sufficient for us to say it's all in latent space. That's not a good enough answer to anybody. So I think that's one side of the equation. So first we have to be able to guarantee the stuff. I mean, like when you fly in a plane, you can be sure, you may not understand how the plane works, but I think there are aeronautic engineers who understand exactly how the thing works, right? We as people building those things don't know. So that's just not good. So we have got to sort of sort that out, first thing. So it's an ethical dilemma for us as a field. But then, of course, then there's all these other ethical issues that come in terms of how are you going to get these algorithms, and I like to use the word values, what is important to us as a community, how are you going to get these algorithms to be aligned to your values and take decisions that are aligned to your values. If you're going to have these algorithms that are, for example, looking at resumes and shortlisting them, it's extremely alarming right now. If the algorithm they're using is similar to Netflix, I mean, it's very sad, right? And I don't know whether any of you have read the book called The Weapons of Math Destructions. It's a book about machine learning and how it can be misused, right? So the problem with using these algorithms is that if you get, for example, you're not getting a job with one agency, then all agencies won't give you the job, because chances are they've been trained on the same data, and whatever it is they've thrown you out here, because in the olden days at least you could go somewhere else and hope they don't have the same bias, right? So we've got to be very sure of ourselves as we create these algorithms and align them to what we think are our values of equality, access, justice, those kind of basic things. We are not guaranteeing right now, and I think that's pretty frightening to me.
And I think it's going to be quite a journey to be able to guarantee, because as we say, it works on data, and without that total understanding and transparency of the black box technology, what data it might be reading is, this person is a potential high risk of having a child in 2 years, or is a high risk for depression. And regardless of whether that is something that they would tell you or if that's something on their resume, the biases that they could be learning through data and scrolling, taking the data from somebody's social media could have an underlying bias that we don't even see.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have these, and that's why we have to be able to explain our algorithms. Because unless we can explain our algorithms, and there may be many covariates that respond to something, right? So you may think that you're looking at, let's say, race or something, but it could be just your socioeconomic status or which suburb you live. There are other indicators which are equally informative about that thing, right? So you've got to make sure that it's not biased by any of those things, and that's quite hard.
It's going to be an interesting journey to watch.
Yeah.
Raj, would you like to comment on the risks and ethics of...
It's an area that I'm currently working on a lot. The risks are, one thing is AIs don't have aspirations. So they don't set out to make a society better or worse, despite what Hollywood tells you. So don't believe it. Robots are not going to go out shooting by themselves. And there are some, big problems right now where we've rolled out, in terms of HR, my previous startup that I did build a sort of AI algorithm. Again, it may be biased. And back then I didn't know that I was even building things with bias in it. Pretty sure it is biased, knowing how I built it. And it learns from the past. It doesn't set itself to be better. It doesn't have a goal of I can do better, I can create a better society. It literally tries to learn the past and assumes your future is going to be as good as the past. And that is a genuine worry. And coupled with algorithms we don't fully understand. A lot of Silicon Valley's people, like I was 10, 15 years ago, we just didn't know back then. I didn't know back then that these were things that I should even consider. And lack of education and lack of interest in things like ethics, probably because I was younger and didn't care about it. I'm sure some of you who went through the ethics class at university can relate to that. Yeah, 21, it made no sense why I was being taught all that.
You're soon going to discover that quite quickly. So I think that these conversations are really important to have, just to be able to see that we are aware of those biases, we are aware of the risks and ethics, and that we're working on technology with that in mind.
Sorry, just to jump in, I'd like to give a couple of just real examples of failures of AI systems that we are currently aware of. So one is, if you look at Project Natal, which is this Microsoft project which ended up going into what the Kinect was that shipped with every Xbox. The Kinect could sort of extract your sort of pose, so it would understand the structure of your skeleton and how you're sort of doing something in a space. Though at first, while they're going through the research process and training the early versions of the algorithm that ran on the Kinect, Microsoft came to a point where it worked really well. It would extract 18 different joint positions of a person inside a room and do it really reliably. And then they went to test it and put it into production and realized that it only really worked well if you were a white male between 5'8" and 6'2". And that's because all of the researchers were white males between 5'8" and 6'2", or most of them. And that if you were to then, try and test this system on like a black woman that's slightly overweight, it just wouldn't even pick her up. So if you were to take similar technologies that had biases around the people it worked for, in terms of accuracy, and you were to deploy that into things like aged care systems, where you have this tech that runs in a person's home and detects things like falls, then you don't want one demographic or type of person that receives safer or higher levels of care and safer care because of the biases of your system. And a second example is, so before working in my current space, I used to work in computer security or network security. And there's a huge field of research around, attacking the accuracy of neural networks at the moment. And there's a thing called a one-pixel attack, where you can pretty much take an input image that a neural network might look at and say, oh, this is a dog, or this is a cat, or this is a person doing something, change a single pixel just by interfering with it, and it would completely screw with the accuracy of the system that otherwise might get a dog 95% of the time. It just won't ever get it. And it's really, really hard to defend against things like that, just because of the black box nature of these deep learning systems. Because we don't know exactly how they work, it's really hard to fix them and make them more robust to attacks like this. And this is just one attack, so that without sacrificing performance. So then you get this ethical question of, should I make something that is more robust to attack, but is 10% less accurate? Or should I sacrifice security to make a network that is going to perform better and give me a competitive edge? So just ethical questions, I guess.
And they're very rarely straightforward, and they're very rarely a black and white answer. The nature of learning in itself is through failure, as we can all agree. So I think the spotlight is on technology and artificial intelligence because of its success and because of how intelligent it is, for it not to fail at all. But in order for it to be efficient, it's going to need to fail. Looking up at the screen, robots is quite a bold topic up there. If we're talking about the topics of industries in KEATON, I might stay with you for a minute. I was recently talking about technology with a client of mine who owns a beauty salon, and her response to me was, it kind of skips us. In the beauty industry, we're not really tech heavy. Don't really have an interest in any type of artificial intelligence. It's just never going to touch our industry. I took a second to kind of process that, and I then asked her, well, how many people have you lost to waxing, or of waxing clients to, new technology in laser hair removal? how many clients, spray tanning clients, have you lost to a spray tanning booth? And then I thought, how many beauty salons do you now walk into that you see a receptionist with now all of the online booking systems? And it really took her aback to realise that technology affects all of our lives. At what level of, whether it's a few if combinations or whether it's a deep learning machine, it's touching all of our industries. It's touching all of our lives in some way or another, how we purchase and in what way we engage with businesses and industries and products. What industries do you think will be the most shaken up by this development, and which industries are not running the risk of becoming obsolete? It's a double-handed question. Take it one piece at a time.
Well, first off, the interesting observation around your beauty salons. I like that because if you look at the health, beauty and wellness sort of space, 2% of businesses have representation on the internet. And if you compare that to restaurants, where you can order almost anything from most restaurants online through Uber Eats, the access is there. It's just not quite there for being able to book a treatment or get a haircut. I just think it's interesting the shift when you think about it, kind of similar industries. I mean, you interact with them differently, but you get the idea.
Similar sense.
I would say if you can sort of split up industries. Actually, can I answer this rather than focusing on industries, but more focusing on occupations?
Absolutely.
So when you split up occupations, you can sort of group them by the work involved to do a certain job. So you've got things like physical work in a predictable environment, physical work in an unpredictable environment, having to deal with people, having to manage others, having to collect information, process it to do something, and like in case of data processing, heaps of people just work with spreadsheets. And then you've got applying expertise, and you can sort of split that up massively. And I think certain industries have a lot of jobs that are, I guess, skewed into any one of those 5 or 7 things. I can't remember how many I just gave you. And things like transport and logistics, working as a taxi driver or long haul trucking, like that's sort of a super repetitive task in an unpredictable environment. And you compare that to, I guess, stacking boxes in a warehouse. Robots already stack boxes in warehouses because the environment's predictable and it's easier to sort of tackle as a problem space. And you're sort of starting to see the transition into self-driving cars, self-driving trucks, as our ability to model and map out unpredictable environments increases. And it's kind of scary when you think that between 10 to 15% of most the jobs for most modern Western countries are related to road freight, or I guess just transport and logistics. So more and more of those jobs are going to become vulnerable to automation based on each of those tasks and the ability for AI or intelligent systems to tackle problems pertaining to dealing with people or collecting data, processing data, functioning in unpredictable environments, functioning in predictable environments. It's just hard to predict how quickly or exactly which environment, because there's other issues like health, beauty and wellness has no reason not to be online, but it's just not. So it's sort of hard to give you an exact answer there.
Oh, that's good. Geoff, do you have anything to add in respect to the industries or occupations that will be mostly affected?
I think KEATON's right to focus on the professions rather than on the industries. I think it's very hard to think of an industry which is not going to be affected, because all industries have some repetitive nature to them. If I was to nominate a profession, which I think is probably safe, acting. So I don't think people are going to be terribly interested. There might be a bit of novelty value in watching some robots perform on stage.
Oh, the Marvel universe, entire Marvel pictures are all.
So I was thinking more of live acting rather than
And
film.
animations?
So there'll be things like that which are inherently about interaction between people where
That could be the
jobs are
arts
safe.
in general. That could be everything from musical
I was going to
theatre
start
and-
with the arts, but then I was thinking probably things like painting may have some level of automation introduced into them. I'm not sure.
Do you think the novelty will rise based on it being a human act that can be replaced with a machine? Do you think that that would become more of an interest for us to do as it slips?
So I think people are always going to inherently value something which is produced by other people because it's a kind of fascination. To me, the only interesting thing about ballet is that people are able to do such bizarre things, and I think that and athletics, and people are impressed that somebody is able to run that fast, and having a robot run that fast is not going to be remotely interesting. So there's something inherently interesting in seeing humans do extraordinary things, and there may be interest in robot art, but I think it'll be different from interest in human artistic expression.
Svetha and Raj, I might also approach this question with you before we head over to the audience. In terms of jobs that aren't at risk, do you think that it is based around creativity, around innovation, around, like you said, Raj, that AI doesn't have aspirations? Do you think that those kind of jobs and occupations are those that are safe? Like, for example, I'm a relationship specialist, so I can't imagine my clients particularly feeling comfortable to go and talk about their relationship issues with artificial intelligence. Do you think my job is safe?
Your job is safe.
Thank you.
So I think the division was very good about structured, unstructured, repetitive. But I want to add one more element, and I think Goeff has added that, which is the human element, right? Like as Goeff said. So I think the jobs that will stay or will be created will be jobs related to leisure, whatever that is, because there's going to be larger amounts of leisure time, and there will be thousands and thousands of new ways we could keep ourselves occupied. And the other one, of course, is aged care, right? Like coupled with what's happening with the demography and the care we have to give. I don't think anyone's going to take their jobs. And similarly, as you said, anything that's to do with understanding humans, we're very, very far off. I seriously doubt any robot could do your job.
So just the same concern as overpopulation on Mars with my job. We're on about the same time horizon.
No, you're good. You're
We're
good forever.
We're good forever.
You're good forever.
Can I just tack onto that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so the aged care one is also interesting, and I totally agree that it's going to be really hard to replace that human contact aspect of care. But the aged care industry in Australia is a good one to pick up because while we've got, I think it's about 350, 400,000 people over the age of 85 that require care in Australia, there's only 14,000 registered nurses working in the entire industry for residential aged care. So the ratio there is just completely off. So it's not a matter of necessarily taking the jobs of people working in aged care, I think, but more making the people that are working in that industry more efficient.
Yeah, right.
So that they can focus on the things that they need to be doing, and that's something that AI can really help with.
Yeah.
I don't think it's like a doomsday thing, like taking all of the jobs of the people working as nurses, but more improving the quality of life of people, and I think that's something that I'm really excited about
I like that.
around AI.
And Deakin, we did a startup last year, the year before actually, called Sophie Hub. You can look it up. So we designed that system that's attempting to introduce a little bit of AI for aged care. Now, irony is that the biggest result we got was we said good morning when people woke up, and that by far was the biggest nice thing that people said. It said good morning to me. Literally, that was like outranked every other feature we put in there. So I mean, people are very funny that way. And in terms of industrial impact, looking at the kind of projects we're getting of late, we've had a big gas and plant kind of place, and they said we'd like to have something watch over our workers and see if they're doing unsafe things. And unsafe was interesting in the way they described unsafe. It sounded like they didn't want workers loitering about and just having a chinwag with each other. But they said it's unsafe because they're not supposed. They should be watching things, not sitting there and having a gas bag with each other. But that's an interesting problem, and that will be something that is. There's other things around safety where they want to know if all the pumps are connected in the right places. There's a ton of work going on in optimizing or making things efficient, from engines to industrial size ovens and fan blades of big windmills and all these things. They'll all add up. I mean, you might save a bit of power here, make things a little bit more efficient. So it is going into industries. We've even had a lot of financial companies come by the lab last few weeks. They're saying what's going on with the Royal Commission is not very pretty. We would like to pick up people that are doing the wrong thing against the company's beliefs or vision and things like that. So there is work being done, and that's like a second-hand review of advice being given by financial advisors. And can AI do that? We don't even know if AI can actually review it, but these are interesting problems, and that'll be worth tackling.
So it's another layer. So when we speak about AI and the rate of speed of technology, we look at everything from narrow technology of if combinations to machine learning to artificial intelligence to nanotechnology. Being able to discuss it on such a broad level is quite unique, and we thank you so much for your insight in your particular research and expertise. What scale are we behind in those other countries like the Silicon Valleys? Where do we sit?
Infrastructure, I'm of the opinion they'll win. Silicon Valley and China in Asia will win. We will have to develop niches where we will be stronger. An area that Svetha works in is in little data, and that's not something I've noticed a lot of Silicon Valley companies do. Americans like to do big things, so we have to do little things. And focus our efforts on things that are likely to be successful.
Nothing wrong with little things. Do you think cognitive learning in AI is important? And for the people who don't know what cognitive learning is, give a brief explanation.
Jeff?
All
yours.
I'm happy to pass on this one. So I think there are several things which are meant by cognitive learning, so it might help if the questioner was to clarify exactly what they mean by cognitive learning. Do they mean cognitive learning in terms of artificial intelligence systems using cognitive networks, or
So that next phase into administering the neural networks of AI?
right? So it's not a term which has a single, clearly defined definition. So need a bit more clarity to be able to answer that question.
Yeah.
There is a mic. Whoever asked the question, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, just more on the system that cognitive learning is based on, I guess, that I've done a little research in.
Just the theory behind it is that it's the person's sort of thinking, I guess. Is that important in AI, if I sort of explain further?
So you're thinking about cognitive behaviour therapy and so on. So that is a process which applies to truly intelligent things, us, and the current artificial intelligence systems we have aren't remotely intelligent, and so something like that is just not applicable in my view.
It's almost like what KEATON was talking about earlier, how they modelled the technology around a particular build, whether a particular way of thinking or developing thinking. You know, we are so unique as humans, how we're able to implement what type of cognitive thinking. Is it the researchers? Is it is it based on research? So I think the question in itself is a minefield.
The other thing is
Excuse the pun.
AI is better to compare with the AI of yesterday. So if you looked at an AI from 10 years ago and then today, it's a good comparison. Comparing AI with humans is probably not very good.
I think that there's a big comparison with, you know, the technology that we use today and the technology that answers back. So we've been telling air conditioners what temperature to make our room for a long time. Just because it doesn't particularly answer you back, the temperature of the room is 23 degrees, have a lovely day, we'll turn it off for you at this time. So our technology has evolved and we've been telling it what to do for some time. I think it's just that human element that we're able to engage, which is the thing that people are the most intrigued about, which kind of rings true with what you were talking about. Is it Sophie?
Yes,
Where
Sophie.
she would say
Sophie,
to you, good morning was the most interesting part of the technology. So as humans, I think we're really interested in where the brain is. Should we be putting more effort into solving the control problem? Is this control around the out of hand, losing control of our intelligences and them learning further than our own?
So I think, again, this is a question which needs a bit more clarification. Which control problem?
Welcome to the
so many
technology
control
industry.
problems that could be a candidate.
So if we're thinking about, you know, Skynet, and we're thinking that we're going to lose control of the machines that we build and they're going to, you know, we are going to be the ants of our planet. Would that be something we'd be looking at for control?
So I think it was Raj who said earlier that the artificial intelligence systems that we construct don't have any desires.
Aspirations. You can give them
desires. Well, so you can give them objectives
functions.
to achieve, but they have no independent agency. So it's a long way in the future that AI systems are going to decide to do something for
Of
themselves.
any potential control. KEATON, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think an interesting, I don't know if this is what you meant by that question, but an interesting problem that I've heard before is the usual, you know, you've got your car's driving straight, you're about to hit a brick wall, and the car's going to kill you if you hit that brick wall, so you can make a decision to turn left and hit, you know, 5 old people, or turn right and you'll hit, you know, a toddler, or you can do nothing and slam into the wall. How does the car know which decision to make? And, you know, whose responsibility is it to make that decision? I think the most realistic answer as to what would be implemented would be that the car will ask you what your preference is before that event ever happens. So then it's not the car's fault, it's still your fault because you'd be making that same decision anyway.
Yeah.
And there's no real way to shift the burden of responsibility for, I guess, control of these systems easily.
Because a human would make that decision as much
There's
as
also another, in control there's a little, this one you'll probably remember, is another area called controlled hallucination. I don't know if any of you have a Google Home at home, device, those little mini speakers. Sometimes they listen to things that you've never said. I don't know if you've experienced it. If you haven't, just wait, it'll happen, right? My machine decided to play a song in the middle of the night. Terrified my wife a lot.
He was ready for a party. You were just behind the times.
No,
Raj.
it's the worst part is the piano. It played the piano at about 2 a.m. Not a good music to be
Shrilling.
playing by itself.
Especially if you don't like scary movies.
No, it was the last played song and it just decided, whatever reason it did it, and that actually is called the hallucination problem in AI. And there is a field called controlling these hallucinations. So, yeah. And it is hallucinating that you asked it to play music when you haven't. It also goes to the same thing where it thinks it's a stop signal, or it thinks it's green light, but it's a red light. And the car continues on. So
This guy might have changed 1 pixel in the image for it to go astray.
it gives a lot of ammunition to bad actors in society.
Right.
Yeah, you can cause a lot of damage without doing much work.
Right. I think one of the questions around control is that when artificial intelligence goal or objective deviates from ours, and that's when we feel that we're at a loss to control. Next question. As someone not in the AI field, can you say more about what exactly you mean when you say that AI researchers aren't sure how their algorithms work?
Okay, I can. Okay.
That's a good question.
So what we mean is this, right? For example, in the field of computer science, we have a very clear idea of what is computable, which means it can be computed. And this is not, we just try stuff. We have proper theory for this. So we know, for example, that if you, for example, let's say you build an algorithm for sorting. So you can imagine building yourself an algorithm for sorting. We have a very clear idea about how this algorithm will work if you increase the number of items it has to sort from, say, 5 to, I don't know, 50 million. We know exactly how that algorithm will work. You don't have to run it, right? You don't have to run it. We have a clear idea of how it will work. So we have very clear ideas about whether this algorithm is going to converge. Will this algorithm ever finish? Will this algorithm fail when something happens? How does it scale? These are things we don't know with neural networks. These are the things we don't know. We don't have bounds on what is called regret. Like, how do we know this is, how can you guarantee this is going to converge? We don't have the maths for this yet.
Yet. So we are working on it, just so don't panic. Yeah.
Actually, I've heard this question a number of times, and I've listened to a number of answers to this. So I'd be really interested how you would react to how will people pay for their leisure lifestyles in an AI-fueled world?
Simple. You get paid the same, but you work 4 days a week.
Right? I'd be okay with that. So I think what people are worried about is having to use our brain less. So if we're relying upon technology and then we're less stimulated, or we've got less work, or we're living really efficient lives that we don't have to work as much and we won't get paid as much, how will we sustain that lifestyle?
In the extreme case where 60% of people are unemployed, and I know you guys don't think this will happen anytime soon, but in that extreme case, I think things like universal basic income are incredibly important, and taxation of automation to fund it. If you're paying for the cost of electricity for labour, then you should be taxed for that.
Actually, just to add to that, the idea that we do work is a fairly new one in humanity, right? Like if you went back to hunter-gatherers, they don't do work, right? Because they live efficient lives where they can get what they need in 2 hours, and then they can hang out for 8 hours, right? And this is what humans did till we started to become pastoralists, and then everything became complex because then we had to look after our grain and keep the rats away and then make this money and then keep it in the bank and all this stuff. So maybe the whole idea, who is to say that idea, the very notion of what it means to be us doesn't change, right? Humans have lived in worlds where they had enormous amounts of time as leisure. And even in Europe, I think before the industrial age, lots of people, and the idea that you would work did not define people. You worked because you had to work, not because you wanted to work. And this was sort of a dominant idea in, I think, history. So who's to know what the notion of work?
And then we're looking at work in different ways. What we would traditionally see as secure work is a 9 to 5, PAYG, superannuation. And with the rise of the gig economy, the pure nature in which we do work is continually changing. So where we find ourselves working alongside artificial intelligence could be more productive and more efficient than what we would see traditionally as work. What is the opinions on AI's role in renewable energy industry? And how important is AI in achieving, is to achieving 100% renewable penetration?
100% renewable, so there's quite a lot of politics involved there to start with. We will make things efficient with use of optimization strategies. That's the short answer for it. Yeah.
Do you think that that is a focus of one of the problems in the world that AI are looking at, which is renewable energy?
There's algorithms that work on optimization. So, and there's a whole class of these things which you can apply to find better ways to use resources,
Great.
Including renewable energy.
So maybe we can go backwards, where today our car is fueled by petrol, and if you went back 1,000 years ago, our vehicles were fueled by grass because they were cows and horses. So maybe in the future we are looking to continually evolve from things that we're fueled by, right? What are your thoughts on the application of AI in the stock market? Do you think it can cause a crash?
Yes, it already has.
Short answer.
That's a yes, absolutely.
Yeah, the last stock market crash we had was in part fueled by automatic trading systems. So it was exacerbated by systems which automatically sold when the market reached certain points.
So we've seen the market go down for 6 minutes, 6 or so minutes. That cost $64 billion in previous times. So whether or not it's a massive crash of technology, or whether it's insider trading, or whether it's Wolf of Wall Street, I think both in human behaviour and technology can intervene on anything that's got the dollar signs next to it. Would that be right?
It's complex systems generally. When you have really complex systems, they fail in really weird ways. And it goes back to the things is we don't know why they fail like that, and we can't fully predict it. We can watch it and say, yep, it's gone like that, after it's done.
After it's done.
After it's done. So there's a lot of stuff we don't really fully understand yet.
The prevention over cure isn't as easy as the cure. What are your thoughts on the Australian federal government's recent backflip on innovation, and how do you think this will impact investments on AI? Philip Daladakis was in the room. That would be a great question to push him on.
Backflip on innovation. I don't know what the recent
Yeah, I don't
backflip
know.
is.
You don't know?
I don't know what the
I
backflip
don't know
of
what
innovation
the
is.
black flip is.
Potentially it's a reduction on funding.
R&D funding? Is it an R&D investment funding?
Which is interesting. Does that correlate with the investment into AI?
This may be related to the review they did last year.
Right.
And if it is, then I think not much. I wouldn't say much, no.
There's also a $200 million innovation fund run by, its main Sequence Ventures, which is sort of a spin-off from the CSIRO and Data61 sort of supported, which is relatively new. It's run by the guy who used to head up Blackbird Ventures, which is Australia's biggest VC fund, and a guy called Bill Zimmerman. Mike Zimmerman, sorry. Anyway, I think that there has never been a better time to run a deep tech startup in Australia than right now. I think there's still a long way to go. Like 1/3 of my company's investors are overseas. But that said, my company probably wouldn't have been funded in Australia at all 10 years ago. So I think we're heading in the right direction, but there's still a lot to change.
Great. Do you believe AI will ever have a capacity to be conscious? And if so, approximately how far into the future could this be?
Forever is a very long time. So I think it's a very long way off. And perhaps the form that computers take in 100 years will be unrecognisable as computers as they are now, and what such things might be capable of doing.
Where do you think the
knows?
curiosity is driven from? Where we are at and where and what time frame. We like to put labels on things, we like to put time frames on things, we like to put them in their boxes so it feels safe and we can deal with it as it comes. Being able to emotionally anticipate an engagement with an artificial intelligence, or what do you think the drivers are to have a definitive, or not even a definitive, a roundabout answer in terms of timeframes and evolutions of artificial intelligence?
One of the things is a question of comfort. Do I actually have to worry about it? If it's 100 years off, then the answer is no.
Right. Cool. So we'll blame it on our grandchildren's children's children. Yep, we can handle that. Will you please join me in a round of applause for our incredible speakers?